How is? I've been thinking again about alternative ideas of how humans came about. I'm not saying that Darwinism or creation or natural selection are wrong or completely out of my worldview. I think, as it stands, Darwinism and natural selection is probably almost, by a long shot, the most feasible process on which this came about, you came about, and so on. But thinking about the idea further, and this is purely on a philosophical tangent that came out of last night's Philosophy of Now program, which you've all been raving about, just to throw another sort of philosophical, purely speculative idea out there of how we came about in a different way. As you know, I've spent a lot of my life reading about mythology, taking a great interest in it, and there's no, other than the Abrahamic story of creation, of God creating a man, there's nothing like that. Everything else seems to be an emergence as a result of cataclysmic forces or existing forces being brought into thought. The fire of, as the Druids used to say, who puts the fire of thought in the minds of men? This kind of thing. Consciousness. Without indulging metaphor, or metaphor or mythology of the past, let's look at the idea from creating a mythology of our own today, a mythology in the present of what we have now, okay? So let me think in terms of that, right? So imagine that millions of years ago, there was a primordial thought that something became, billions of years ago, something became conscious. Some cosmic force that we will never understand, that we will never be able to grasp. Now this is just speculation now, I'm not saying it happened. Came into thought, right? When it came into thought, it had to create an identity for itself. So as soon as it said to itself, I exist, therefore it was creating the forces to begin a process. Very similar to a light switched on, the electrons are starting to flow now. Now this eventual force, this eventual thought, this spark of consciousness, this primordial thing, in time, I'm talking about vast amounts of time, realized that it could only exist as a multiple unit, because it quite simply could not create the universe it wanted, the experience it wanted, as a singular form. So therefore it split itself, and these kept replicating. And each one of these primordial consciousness spawn tangents went off, and suppose one of them was you, okay? One of them was you. The humans, right? Say a couple of 100 million years ago, it became a very highly developed fire in the minds of nothing. It somehow then managed to become alive in terms of a physical structure. Maybe it became plasma. Think of the will-o'-the-wisps, the lights that run across the fields at night. Are they that? Are they a consciousness trying to create form? Then this will-o'-the-wisp, this pulsating light form, when it lit up, it became aware of its environment. There was nothing around it. Or it was something around it and it gravitated towards it. Perhaps then it had to manifest structure, and the first thing it became was a gas. From a gas it became something else. Maybe this gas lived at the bottom of the ocean. And this gas then at the bottom of the ocean in the darkness, producing light, became aware of other particles and other molecules around it, and began to manifest into a kind of a proto-early amoeba type structure. Then it manifested that it could not move around in the structure. It developed little flippers, little filaments. It rose up and down the oceans, and then realized at times at the top of the ocean that there was light up there that was drawn towards the light, so it had to change its structure. Then it went to the surface and realized that there was oxygen up there that was different. It had to give up its gills or give up its breathing system and become something else, come onto land. And then, purely through a subconscious need to develop these senses, became what we are today. There was no God involved. There was only the initial spark of consciousness that created us all. When Christianity and Abrahamic thought put this idea that God created us, when God created man, he didn't create an ongoing project. He created a finished project. And that made people believe that only God could then improve upon man. Man could not do it himself. This is where the transhumanists then come from. They are now the technological gods, and they're going to take over, and they're going to improve us. And we're accepting it because we've been duped to believe that we had no power over ourselves from day one. Now, this philosophical idea I'm throwing out there is just to make you think and make others think and discuss that there's numerous aspects that we came to this point. It doesn't have to be natural selection, could be. It didn't have to be necessarily a God in the sky making us. I believe the mythology brings us much closer to the truth, that we are a non-passive, I might add, an active assemblage of opportunities that were created over millions and billions of years. And that brought us to this point. And we also probably created our souls for that reason, to give us a more deeper spiritual identity. We also probably create our frontal cortex when... Let me show you a painting I have. This painting here called How the Universe Was Made. It shows the first human being, an early human being, taking up a piece of soot and drawing on a cave wall. And from that first moment of creativity, an explosion of potentials and ideas comes out, and he literally builds the universe that we live in today. Now, isn't that an awesome thing to think you're a participant rather than you're subject to the whims of God, or you're simply just an accident of biological processes which you have no control over? It could be wrong. I could be talking shite, but we've been limited in our language in so many ways that we've forgotten that we have the ability to discuss beyond the official narratives, whether it be aliens, nonsense like aliens created us. That's also another part of the Christian idea that we somehow have no control of ourselves, rather than we're just animals who developed from a desire not to be eaten. I think there's so much more to it, and this is the great tragedy of modern people, is that we've been denied the vernacular and the vocabulary to actually have this philosophical debate in these terms. How the universe was made.